The Mediterranean crashes against limestone cliffs where Lebanon meets the sea, carving narrow harbors between rocky headlands that will shelter the ships of history's greatest merchants. Behind this waterfront strip, the Lebanon mountains rise like sentinels, their slopes heavy with cedar forests that will build temples for pharaohs and palaces for kings. Between mountain and sea lies a sliver of fertile land barely 20 miles wide, a corridor so narrow that a man can walk from the peaks to the shore in a single morning, yet destined to birth a civilization that will span 3 continents. Here, in this compressed landscape where every mile matters, geography shapes destiny with ruthless precision. The mountains block eastern winds while channeling moisture from the sea into rain that nourishes terraced gardens and olive groves. Natural harbors punctuate the shore at intervals that seem designed by divine hands. Byblos nestled in its bay, Sidon commanding the central waterfront, Tyre perched on its island fortress. Each port controls a stretch of shoreline. Each competes with its neighbors for commerce, yet all share the fundamental reality that survival depends on looking seaward instead of inland. The Canaanites who settle these shores around the 3rd millennium before Christ bring with them the languages and gods of the broader Levantine world, but the sea transforms everything it touches. While their cousins in the interior tend flocks and till fields, these maritime dwellers learn to read wind patterns and star positions. They discover that the murex shells washing up on their beaches yield a dye more precious than gold when properly extracted. Most importantly, they realize that the cedar trees growing on their mountain slopes represent floating wealth, timber that can be shaped into ships and exchanged across waters where no other wood possesses such strength and fragrance. Pharaonic papyrus first carries tales of these waterfront traders around 2600 BC, when royal scribes record the arrival of Byblos ships carrying cedar logs down the Nile. The very name Byblos becomes synonymous with papyrus in the known world, as this northern port emerges as the crucial middleman between Nilotic river commerce and mountain resources. In Pharaoh Sneferu's reign, 40 ships loaded with cedar timber sail from Byblos to Memphis, their precious cargo destined for royal furniture and sacred barks that will carry dead kings into eternity. The relationship proves transformative for both civilizations. Gold from the land of pyramids flows north, while timber travels south. But more than goods cross these waters. Hieroglyphic influences seep into Canaanite writing systems, while artistic motifs from Memphis begin appearing on ivory carvings and metal work. The port settlements absorb techniques for working stone and bronze, adapting them to local materials and preferences. Yet unlike the inland Canaanite strongholds that often fall under direct pharaonic control, the harbour communities maintain their independence through careful diplomacy and indispensable services. Mesopotamian influences arrive by land routes that wind through Syrian passes and mountain valleys. Akkadian becomes the language of international correspondence, even when Canaanite merchants are writing to pharaohs. Cuneiform tablets found in waterfront archives reveal sophisticated commercial networks stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Nile Delta. Techniques for bronze working and glass making from Babylon take root in harbour workshops, while Syrian amber and cedar resins flow eastward to Ur. The result is a unique synthesis: port settlements that speak Canaanite languages, but write in multiple scripts, worship local versions of universal deities, and create art that blends influences from 3 continents. Baal, the storm god, acquires Nilotic attributes while retaining his Canaanite essence. Astarte, the love goddess, adopts Mesopotamian symbols while keeping her Phoenician identity. Most importantly, El, the father of gods, evolves into the patron deity of individual settlements, while maintaining his role as supreme divine authority. Religious practices reflect this cultural complexity. Temple architecture borrows pharaonic proportions and Mesopotamian decoration while serving distinctly Canaanite rituals. Priests master multiple languages to serve international congregations of merchants, diplomats, and travelers. Sacred prostitution, common throughout the Near East, flourishes in ports where sailors seek divine blessing for dangerous voyages. Child sacrifice, practiced sparingly in agricultural communities, becomes institutionalized in maritime centers where life and death decisions affect entire populations dependent on seaborne commerce. Metalworking reaches extraordinary sophistication as artisans combine Mesopotamian techniques with Nilotic aesthetics and Anatolian materials. Bronze weapons produced in Sidon rival anything manufactured in Damascus or Memphis. Gold jewelry crafted in Tyre displays technical mastery that impresses pharaohs and Babylonian kings alike. Most remarkably, smiths begin experimenting with ironworking centuries before the technology spreads throughout the Mediterranean, creating tools and weapons that give their settlements significant military advantages. The royal dye industry emerges from accident and observation. Women gathering shellfish notice that broken murex shells stain their hands with colors ranging from pale pink to deep crimson, depending on the species and processing method. Systematic experimentation reveals that certain varieties of murex, when properly crushed and fermented, yield a hue so intense and permanent that it surpasses any existing dye. The process proves laborious. Thousands of shells produce mere ounces of coloring, but the results command astronomical prices throughout the known world. Royal courts from Egypt to Mesopotamia demand textiles dyed in this imperial crimson that only these harbor settlements can supply. Pharaohs reserve specific shades for divine ceremonies, while Mesopotamian kings use the colored garments to distinguish ranks within their bureaucracies. The dye becomes so closely associated with royal power that centuries later, long after the technology spreads to other regions, Phoenician crimson remains the standard by which all other imperial dyes are measured. Glass production follows similar patterns of innovation and monopolization. Techniques for creating glass beads and small vessels reach these shores through commercial contacts, but local artisans push the technology beyond its origins. They discover that regional sand, when combined with specific alkali plants and heated to precise temperatures, produces glass superior to nilotic products. More importantly, they develop methods for creating larger vessels, colored glass, and eventually glass bottles that revolutionize storage and transport throughout the known world. The combination of royal dye, glass production, metalworking, and timber creates an economic foundation unlike any other in the Mediterranean. Unlike Egypt, which depends on the Nile's annual floods, or Mesopotamia, which requires constant irrigation maintenance, these port settlements possess renewable resources that increase in value through skilled processing. Cedar trees regenerate over decades instead of requiring annual replanting. Murex shells reproduce in waters without human intervention. Sand and alkali plants exist in unlimited quantities. This economic independence allows unprecedented political flexibility. When pharaonic power wanes during intermediate periods, harbor communities maintain prosperity through Mesopotamian connections. When Mesopotamian empires collapse, Nilotic commerce provides alternative markets. When both great powers demand exclusive loyalty, diplomats master the art of serving multiple masters without fully submitting to any single authority. Urban development reflects these unique circumstances. Unlike inland strongholds built around defensive walls and central temples, Waterfront settlements organize themselves around harbors and workshops. Streets lead from docks to markets instead of from gates to palaces. Residential areas mix wealthy merchants with skilled artisans, while separating social classes into distinct quarters. Temples serve international congregations instead of purely local populations. Architecture adapts to maritime requirements. Buildings feature flat roofs suitable for drying crimson-stained textiles and storing timber. Warehouses with thick walls protect valuable goods from moisture and theft. Harbour installations include specialized docks for different types of vessels and cargo. Most innovatively, some buildings incorporate cedar into their construction, creating structures that resist decay and insect damage far better than typical construction of antiquity. Writing systems evolved to meet commercial needs instead of administrative purposes, while hieroglyphs serve religious and royal functions. A Mesopotamian cuneiform handles legal and bureaucratic documents. Waterfront scripts develop primarily to record commercial transactions, inventory lists, and shipping manifests. This practical orientation leads to simplified writing systems that require fewer symbols and less training to master, making literacy more widespread among merchants and artisans than in societies where writing serves primarily elite functions. The archaeological record reveals sophisticated urban planning that prioritizes economic efficiency over ceremonial grandeur. Drainage systems channel rainwater into cisterns instead of merely protecting elite residences. Public spaces accommodate market activities while serving religious functions. Harbour facilities include not just docks, but also shipbuilding yards, repair facilities, and specialized storage areas for different types of cargo. Cultural identity emerges from this unique blend of influences and circumstances. Waterfront inhabitants begin calling themselves Kenani, people of the land of crimson, distinguishing themselves from inland relatives who lack access to murex shells and maritime commerce. This identity transcends individual port loyalties while preserving local traditions and rivalries. A merchant from Byblos recognizes kinship with traders from Sidon, despite commercial competition between their settlements. Marriage patterns reflect commercial connections as much as social status. Merchant families arrange unions that strengthen business relationships instead of merely accumulating land or titles. Women often manage enterprises while their husbands travel on expeditions, giving them economic power unusual in societies of antiquity. Children learn multiple languages and commercial skills alongside traditional religious and cultural education. Military organization adapts to maritime needs instead of territorial requirements. Instead of maintaining large standing armies for defending agricultural land, port settlements invest in naval forces capable of protecting shipping routes and harbor installations. Fortifications focus on waterfront areas while surrounding entire urban centers. Military alliances serve commercial purposes as much as defensive needs. Religious life reflects international connections while maintaining local distinctiveness. Temples welcome foreign merchants and their gods while preserving traditional Canaanite rituals. Festivals align with sailing seasons instead of agricultural cycles. Priests master healing arts particularly relevant to sailors and travelers. Most significantly, religious practices begin emphasizing personal relationships with deities instead of purely communal worship, reflecting the individualistic nature of commercial society. By 1500 BC, these maritime settlements have developed all the fundamental characteristics that will define Phoenician civilization for the next millennium. They possess advanced seafaring technology, sophisticated commercial networks, unique manufacturing capabilities, and cultural identities that transcend local boundaries while preserving individual port autonomy. Most importantly, they have learned to thrive in the spaces between great empires instead of seeking to become empires themselves. The Bronze Age collapse that devastates Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Hittite Empire around the 13th century, before Christ creates chaos throughout the known world. Commercial networks dissolve as political authorities crumble. Settlements burn as the mysterious sea peoples sweep through the eastern Mediterranean. Traditional powers retreat into defensive isolation as economic systems collapse. Yet for these waterfront communities, this catastrophe becomes opportunity. With the great empires weakened or destroyed, new markets open for those bold enough to venture into dangerous waters. The collapse of established shipping routes creates demand for new commercial networks. Most importantly, the destruction of imperial authorities eliminates the political constraints that have limited expansion for centuries. As smoke clears from burned settlements and abandoned palaces, the inhabitants of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre survey a transformed world. The age of serving great empires has ended. The age of Phoenician expansion is about to begin. From their narrow homeland, these maritime traders will soon spread across the Mediterranean, carrying not just goods, but the seeds of a new form of civilization, one based on commerce instead of conquest, networks instead of territories, and adaptation instead of domination. The giants that once overshadowed this shore have fallen. Now it is time for the children of the Crimson Land to emerge from those shadows and claim the sea as their own domain. Dawn breaks over Tyre's island fortress as the last echoes of Bronze Age thunder fade across the Great Sea. Where mighty empires once cast their shadows, empty thrones gather dust in abandoned palaces. The Hittites have vanished like morning mist. Pharaonic power retreats behind Nilotic borders. Mycenaean Greece lies in ashes. Yet from the harbours of the Levant, sails unfurl to catch winds that will carry a new civilization, across waters suddenly free from imperial control. The collapse transforms these maritime communities from tribute-paying vassals into independent powers. No longer must Byblos ships carry their finest cedar to Memphis as royal obligation. No Mesopotamian governors demand tribute from Sidon's workshops. The sea people's rampage, devastating to land-based empires, barely touches harbours defended by swift galleys and protected by island positions. What destroys others liberates the children of the Crimson Dye. King Hiram I of Tyre stands on his palace terrace, surveying waters that stretch unbroken to horizons that once marked the boundaries of Hittite and Mycenaean territories. The morning breeze carries scents of cedar resin and murex shells, but also something new: opportunity. For the first time in centuries, no imperial navy patrols these waters. No foreign overlord demands exclusive loyalty. The sea beckons with possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined pursuing. The transformation begins with a revolutionary understanding of maritime possibilities. Bronze Age shipping had followed established routes between known ports, carrying tribute and diplomatic gifts under imperial protection. Traders traveled as agents of pharaohs or Mesopotamian kings, their vessels essentially floating extensions of terrestrial bureaucracies. The collapse sweeps away these constraints, forcing seafarers to create new approaches to navigation, shipbuilding, and commerce that will reshape the entire marine world. Tyrian shipwrights respond to this challenge by fundamentally reimagining vessel design. The old broad-beamed cargo ships, adequate for short hauls under military escort, fall short for expeditions into unknown waters, where pirates might lurk beyond any headland. Working in yards that stretch along Tyre's artificial harbours, master craftsmen design the bireme, a revolutionary galley that combines speed with cargo capacity, defensibility with seaworthiness. These vessels represent quantum leaps in nautical engineering. 50 meters from stern to stern, their cedar hulls incorporate innovations that Bronze Age shipbuilders never attempted. Twin banks of oars provide unprecedented speed and maneuverability, allowing escape from hostile vessels while maintaining steerage in calm conditions. Metal rams jutting from reinforced prows can shatter enemy hulls, while elevated fighting platforms give warriors tactical advantages during naval combat. The Byram's revolutionary design extends below deck, where sealed compartments protect valuable cargo from seawater, while providing storage for supplies necessary during extended voyages. Freshwater containers, crafted from specially treated leather, maintain drinking supplies for weeks at sea. Food storage areas preserve grain, dried fish, and wine, using methods that prevent spoilage during long journeys. Most significantly, dedicated spaces house the tools and materials necessary for establishing trading posts in regions where area resources may fall short. Navigation becomes both art and science as captains push beyond sight of land for the first time in maritime history. Bronze Age sailors had hugged familiar shores, using landmarks to guide their progress and seeking harbors each evening. The New Age demands skills for crossing open water, where storms can rage for days without offering shelter. Navigators respond by creating celestial methods that transform star patterns into reliable guides. The North Star becomes their primary reference point, its constant position providing a heavenly anchor, while shorelines disappear below horizons. Master navigators learn to calculate latitude by measuring the star's elevation above the horizon, using metal instruments that allow surprisingly accurate determinations of position. Seasonal constellations provide timing guides that help captains plan voyages to coincide with favorable weather patterns and wind directions. Dead reckoning skills evolve to complement celestial navigation, allowing captains to maintain accurate course plotting even when clouds obscure the stars. Navigators learn to estimate speed by timing floating objects as they pass alongside their vessels, then calculate distance traveled by combining speed with elapsed time. Wind direction, ocean currents, and wave patterns all become data points in sophisticated calculations that determine position and course. Weather prediction emerges from necessity as voyages extend far from home ports where regional conditions are familiar. Sailors learn to read cloud formations that herald approaching storms, allowing them to seek shelter or modify course before dangerous conditions manifest. They master the art of identifying seasonal weather patterns that make certain routes impassable while opening others. Most crucially, they create emergency procedures for surviving storms that would devastate less experienced crews. Sidon emerges as the center for metallurgical innovations that support this maritime revolution. While Tyre perfects ship design, Sidonian workshops create specialized tools and weapons adapted to naval warfare and overseas exploration. Metalworking skills, refined through centuries of experience, produce implements specifically designed for use aboard ships and in distant outposts. Sidonian craftsmen design new alloys that resist corrosion from salt water while maintaining the strength necessary for tools and weapons. Copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, and area expertise combine to create implements superior to anything produced during the preceding millennium. Ship fittings, crafted in Sidonian foundries, allow vessels to withstand stresses that would shatter earlier designs, while weapons produced for naval combat devastate pirates and hostile forces. The workshops also produce specialized equipment for establishing overseas outposts. Portable forges allow colonists to work metal in territories where indigenous resources may be inadequate. Collapsible anvils and tool sets enable the replication of native industries in distant territories. Most significantly, Sidonian craftsmen create objects that can be disassembled for transport, then reassembled at faraway destinations. Byblos contributes perhaps the most revolutionary innovation of all, an alphabet that transforms writing from an elite skill into a practical tool for traders and craftsmen. While pharaonic hieroglyphs require years of study and Mesopotamian cuneiform demands extensive training, Biblian scribes create a system that reduces human speech to 22 simple symbols. Each character represents a sound rather than a concept, allowing anyone to master literacy within months instead of decades. The alphabet emerges from the practical needs of expanding commerce, as traditional writing systems fall short for the demands of international business. A trader sailing to Cyprus cannot carry scribes trained in multiple writing systems, but he can learn 22 symbols that allow him to record transactions in any language, maintain inventories of diverse goods, and communicate with business partners who speak different dialects. The system's elegance lies in its simplicity. Unlike cuneiform, which requires hundreds of symbols, or hieroglyphs, which demand knowledge of complex pictographic relationships, this alphabet can be mastered by anyone who needs to record information. Children learn it alongside arithmetic and basic navigation. Women use it to manage household accounts and business enterprises. Most significantly, the system adapts to any language, making it invaluable for traders who must communicate across cultural boundaries. Religious practices evolved dramatically to meet the spiritual needs of a people venturing into unknown waters, where traditional protective rituals may fall short. Melkart, Tyre's patron deity, acquires new attributes as protector of distant outposts and guide for overseas expeditions. His cult spreads throughout the expanding network, providing spiritual unity that transcends the political independence of individual communities. Temples dedicated to Melkart begin maintaining sacred flames that burn continuously, serving both religious and practical purposes. These eternal fires provide navigational beacons for ships approaching harbors at night, while their smoke offers daytime guidance for vessels seeking port. The flames require constant tending, creating permanent priesthoods that also function as harbor pilots and weather observers. The god's mythology expands to incorporate tales of overseas adventure and outpost foundation. Melkart becomes the divine explorer who first crossed dangerous waters to establish communities in foreign lands. His protection extends to all who follow his example, while his wrath falls upon those who threaten traders and colonists. Most significantly, his cult provides legitimacy for overseas ventures by framing them as religious missions blessed by divine authority. Astarte's influence grows as women assume greater responsibilities in managing businesses, while their husbands undertake lengthy voyages. Her temples become centers for business, as well as religious activities, providing secure storage for valuable goods and neutral ground for negotiating contracts between traders from different ports. The goddess's priestesses master skills essential for maintaining communities, where men may be absent for months or years. These religious specialists gain expertise in healing arts particularly relevant to seafaring groups. They treat injuries common to sailors and dock workers, maintain knowledge of medicinal plants that grow in different climates, and preserve healing traditions that become essential in distant outposts where trained physicians are scarce. Most significantly, they serve as midwives and childcare providers for communities where women often bear the primary responsibility for raising children. Child sacrifice, practiced occasionally during the Bronze Age, becomes systematized as communities face unprecedented life and death decisions about overseas ventures. The Topet, sacred precinct, where children are sacrificed to ensure divine favor, appears in every major port and distant foundation. These installations reflect the genuine risks that families accept when committing resources to expeditions that may fail catastrophically. The practice, while horrifying to modern sensibilities, serves multiple functions within this society. It demonstrates community commitment to overseas projects by requiring participants to risk what they value most. It provides religious legitimacy for decisions that might otherwise seem recklessly profit-driven. Most significantly, it creates shared responsibility for success by involving entire communities in the spiritual preparation for distant ventures. Archaeological evidence from Topets reveals the scale and systematic nature of these sacrifices. Hundreds of urns containing cremated remains of infants and young children fill carefully organized burial grounds adjacent to major temples. Inscriptions record the names of families making offerings and the specific divine favors they seek. The installations continue operating for centuries, demonstrating that child sacrifice remains integral to religious practice throughout their period of growth. Cyprus becomes the first major testing ground for these new capabilities. The island's copper mines, disrupted by Bronze Age upheavals, offer opportunities for traders bold enough to venture 90 miles across open water to territories where hostile groups might await. The distance requires navigational skills that previous generations never mastered, while successful missions demand military capabilities adequate for defending trading posts against indigenous resistance. Tyrian expeditions established the first permanent trading posts along Cyprus's southern shore during the 11th century before Christ. These installations begin as seasonal camps where traders beach their vessels during winter months, when navigation becomes too dangerous for return voyages to the mainland. Gradually, they evolve into permanent communities with warehouses, workshops, and residential areas for year-round inhabitants. The Cypriot missions demonstrate that overseas commerce can supplement rather than merely extend traditional shipping routes. Instead of carrying Levantine goods to established markets, these traders create new markets by establishing permanent presences in previously untapped regions. They discover that distant outposts, initially expensive to establish and maintain, eventually become profitable in their own right. As indigenous groups create appetites for imported luxuries, area copper mining provides the economic foundation for permanent establishment. Advanced extraction and refining methods surpass approaches used by native inhabitants, allowing colonists to increase production while improving quality. The enhanced output creates surplus metal for export to original markets, generating profits that justify the initial investment in overseas infrastructure. More significantly, the Cyprus missions demonstrate that distant outposts can create their own industrial capabilities, rather than merely serving as collection points for raw materials. Cypriot workshops begin producing goods that combine maritime skills with area materials, creating hybrid industries that serve both overseas and regional markets. These enterprises become more profitable than simple trading operations, while providing economic foundations for permanent communities. Crete's strategic position makes it the next logical target for systematic growth. Minoan civilization has collapsed, leaving harbors and communities that colonists can occupy without confronting organized resistance. The island's position provides access to both Nilotic and Greek markets, while offering bases for further westward ventures into regions that remain completely unexplored. Outposts along Crete's northern shore begin operating during the 10th century, initially as seasonal bases for trading expeditions to the Greek mainland. The harbours provide secure anchorage for vessels too valuable to risk on open beaches, while the abandoned Minoan installations offer ready-made infrastructure that colonists can adapt to their needs. Most significantly, the island's position allows year-round navigation to multiple destinations. The Cretan colonies function differently from their Cypriot predecessors, focusing on commerce rather than resource extraction. The island's strategic position makes it an ideal entrepot for goods flowing between multiple regions, while its harbours can accommodate the largest vessels that shipyards produce. Warehouses built in abandoned Minoan palaces store goods from Spain, Sicily, and the Greek mainland, while traders negotiate deals with customers from throughout the eastern basin. Cultural synthesis accelerates in these overseas environments, where traditions encounter regional customs that survived the Bronze Age collapse. Minoan artistic motifs begin appearing on pottery and metalwork, while indigenous religious practices blend with imported cults. Most significantly, native groups begin adopting alphabetic writing and business methods, creating hybrid cultures that preserve elements of both traditions. The Greek mainland presents different challenges and opportunities, as Mycenaean collapse has left scattered tribal groups that control small territories, but lack unified leadership. These inhabitants possess skills and resources that traders value: metalworking abilities, agricultural products, and handicraft traditions. But their political fragmentation makes systematic business relationships difficult to establish. These seafaring traders respond by establishing small trading posts along the Greek coast, particularly where natural harbours provide security for vessels and their cargoes. These installations operate more as diplomatic missions than business enterprises, introducing Greek groups to alphabetic writing, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated pottery skills, while gaining access to silver deposits and agricultural surpluses. The relationship becomes mutually beneficial, as both cultures possess technologies and skills that the other lacks. Greeks master shipbuilding methods that allow them to participate in maritime commerce, while these Eastern traders gain access to silver mines that produce metal essential for international transactions. Most significantly, cultural exchange introduces Greeks to alphabetic writing that they adapt for their own language, creating literary traditions that will eventually surpass their origins. Intermarriage between colonists and regional inhabitants creates hybrid communities that serve as bridges between different cultural traditions. Children from these unions often become interpreters and diplomatic intermediaries, facilitating commerce between groups that might otherwise remain hostile. These cultural mediators become essential for extending influence without provoking the military resistance that conquest-oriented empires typically encounter. Anatolia's western shores become another theatre for growth, as Hittite collapse creates power vacuums that maritime traders can exploit. The region's position provides access to overland routes connecting the Great Sea with Central Asian networks, while area resources include timber, metals, and agricultural products that command premium prices in original markets. Trading posts established in natural harbours along the Anatolian coast serve multiple functions within the expanding network. They provide bases for voyages into the Black Sea, where Greek colonies are beginning to emerge, while generating profits from regional timber and mineral resources. Most significantly, these outposts create links with overland routes that connect maritime commerce with continental Asian networks. The Anatolian missions require different approaches from island colonies, like Cyprus and Crete, because native groups possess military capabilities that make conquest impossible and resistance costly. These traders respond by creating diplomatic methods that emphasize mutual benefit rather than exploitation, establishing business relationships that serve regional interests while advancing their own objectives. Area rulers discover that these maritime networks provide access to luxuries and technologies unavailable through traditional channels. Crimson-dyed textiles, glass vessels, and metal weapons enhance their prestige, while alphabetic writing improves their administrative capabilities. In return, they provide security for trading posts, while facilitating access to interior resources that other traders cannot obtain. The Western Basin beckons as confidence grows with successful missions in Cyprus, Crete, Greece, and Anatolia. Sicily's strategic position makes it an obvious target despite its distance from original bases and the presence of native groups that may resist foreign establishment. The island's resources include sulfur deposits, agricultural land, and strategic harbors that could support further westward ventures towards Spain and North Africa. Expeditions to Sicily require unprecedented cooperation between normally competitive ports because no single community possesses the resources necessary for such distant missions. Tyre provides shipbuilding expertise and navigational knowledge. Sidon contributes metallurgical skills and weapons, while Byblos supplies writing systems and business practices. This collaboration marks the beginning of coordinated growth that transcends individual city rivalries. The Sicilian outposts, established along the island's western and southern shores during the 9th century, represent the furthest extension of power at this time. These colonies must be largely self-sufficient because relief from original bases requires weeks of dangerous navigation, while native groups possess military capabilities that make peaceful coexistence essential for survival. The communities succeed through careful diplomacy that emphasizes business benefits rather than territorial control. These overseas outposts provide access to imported goods that native groups cannot obtain elsewhere, while offering markets for regional products that might otherwise have no value. Most significantly, the colonists introduced technologies, improved agriculture, advanced metallurgy, alphabetic writing, that benefit indigenous inhabitants while creating economic relationships that discourage hostility. Spain's mineral wealth transforms overseas ventures from opportunistic missions into systematic colonization. Silver mines in Andalusia produce metal that commands premium prices throughout the basin because traditional sources have become unreliable following the Bronze Age collapse. Spanish tin becomes essential for metalwork production, while regional copper deposits supplement Cypriot supplies that may be interrupted by political instability. The establishment of Ghadir, later known as Cadiz, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, represents the culmination of early maritime growth. Located on the Atlantic shore, where navigational skills must be adapted to ocean conditions, this colony demonstrates that seamanship has advanced far beyond Bronze Age limitations. Ghadir's founders venture into waters that classical mythology will consider the edge of the known world. The colony's success requires innovations in navigation, ship design, and administration that influence practices throughout their expanding network. Atlantic tides and weather patterns differ dramatically from inland sea conditions, forcing navigators to create new methods for maintaining position and plotting courses. Ship designs must accommodate longer voyages and more severe weather, while administrators must manage communities that may be cut off from support for months at a time. Ghadir's economic foundation rests on systematic exploitation of Spanish mineral resources, using methods that transform occasional trading expeditions into permanent industrial operations. Mining engineers introduce approaches for extracting silver that increase production while improving quality, creating surpluses that justify the enormous investments required for establishing and maintaining such distant colonies. The silver mines operate using combinations of indigenous labor and imported expertise that create hybrid communities where Spanish workers learn Eastern methods while supervisors adapt to regional conditions. These arrangements become mutually beneficial as Spanish workers gain access to advanced technologies, while colonists acquire knowledge of area resources and conditions that visiting traders could never obtain. Cultural diffusion accelerates throughout the expanding network as colonists spread technologies and ideas that transform societies from Spain to Cyprus. The alphabet reaches Greek communities, where adaptations create writing systems that will eventually become the foundation for European literacy. Metalworking skills spread to Sicily and Spain, where regional craftsmen create innovations that influence basin technology for centuries. Business practices that originated in Levantine ports become standard throughout the Great Sea, as traders establish consistent methods for conducting commerce across cultural boundaries. Standardized weights and measures facilitate trade between regions with different systems, while laws develop to handle disputes between dealers from different backgrounds. Most significantly, credit systems allow traders to transfer value across vast distances without physically transporting precious metals. Religious syncretism reaches new levels of sophistication as deities encounter regional gods in overseas settings throughout the basin. Melkart acquires attributes of Spanish and Sicilian deities while maintaining his essential character as protector of distant ventures. Astarte merges with Greek and Anatolian goddesses while preserving her role as patroness of business enterprise. These religious adaptations facilitate cultural integration while preserving essential identity. Artistic traditions evolve as overseas workshops blend original skills with regional materials and aesthetic preferences. Ivories carved in Syrian styles incorporate Spanish silver inlays that create hybrid objects valued throughout the basin. Pottery produced in Sicilian workshops combines forms with Greek decorative motifs, while glass production spreads to distant communities where area sand and alkali create products that rival original manufactures. By 900 years before the Christian era, maritime growth has fundamentally transformed the Great Sea from a collection of isolated regional economies into an integrated network spanning 3 continents. Goods produced in Spain reach markets in Cyprus within months of manufacture. Skills created in Sicily spread to communities in Anatolia through business contacts. Most significantly, ideas and innovations flow freely through networks that connect dozens of colonies with their original bases. The success creates new challenges, as prosperity attracts attention from recovering land-based powers that view this growth as threats to their own interests. Assyrian revival in Mesopotamia threatens original security, while Greek groups begin competing for overseas territories. Most ominously, new powers emerging in Italy and North Africa represent potential challenges to dominance in the Western basin. Yet the transformation has already succeeded beyond anyone's imagination during the Bronze Age collapse. From 3 small ports hugging the Levantine shore, this civilization has spread across the Great Sea, creating networks of communities that preserve original culture while adapting to regional conditions. The children of the Crimson Dye have inherited waters that their ancestors could only dream of crossing. The age of growth has demonstrated that small, business-oriented societies can achieve what mighty empires failed to accomplish through military conquest. Instead of demanding tribute, They have created mutual prosperity. Instead of imposing their culture, they have adapted it to regional conditions. Instead of building territorial empires, they have established networks that endure longer than political arrangements based on force. The Great Sea has become their domain, not through superiority of arms, but through excellence of ships, goods, and ideas. The next test will determine whether this remarkable civilization can survive the attention its success has attracted from powers that prefer conquest to commerce, territory to networks, and domination to cooperation. The morning sun illuminates Carthage's harbour as Princess Dido surveys the construction rising from North African shores. Exiled from Tyre by her brother's treachery, she has led her followers across dangerous waters to establish what will become the greatest city of the far-flung seas. The year 814 before Christ marks not merely another trading post, but the birth of an empire that will challenge Rome itself for dominance of the ancient world. Behind her, Tyrian architects lay out streets according to principles learned in their ancestral homeland, while Sidonian craftsmen establish workshops that will soon rival any in the East. Yet this new establishment represents something unprecedented, a fully independent state rather than a dependent outpost, freed from the political constraints that limit the mother cities. Here, Tyrian ingenuity can flourish without regard for Assyrian demands or diplomatic compromises with Levantine overlords. The founding of Carthage crystallizes a transformation that has been building during the 9th century. What began as scattered trading posts strung along foreign coasts has evolved into a web of permanent communities that reproduce and adapt the civilization of their origins. These Atlantic establishments no longer merely serve homeland interests. They pursue their own destinies while maintaining connections that span the entire basin. This evolution reflects changes occurring across the maritime world as the descendants of Bronze Age survivors master technologies and develop institutions that their ancestors could never have imagined. Ship design advances beyond the experimental beremes of earlier generations, producing craft capable of carrying hundreds of tons across open ocean, while maintaining the speed necessary to outrun pirates or hostile fleets. The new ships stretch nearly 70 meters from stern to stern, their cedar hulls reinforced with iron fittings that grant strength unmatched by any previous maritime transport. Triple banks of oars power these giants through calm waters, while massive square sails capture winds that propel them across vast distances. Most remarkably, these craft incorporate living quarters, storage facilities, and workshops that allow crews to remain at sea for months without touching land. Navigation reaches unprecedented sophistication as captains master approaches for crossing waters that previous generations considered impassable. Star charts carved on bronze tablets furnish reference guides for maintaining course during extended voyages, while mathematical calculations allow precise determination of position based on celestial observations. Dead reckoning becomes an exact science as navigators learn to account for currents, wind drift, and compass variations that affect their progress. Weather prediction evolves from folk wisdom into systematic observation as experienced sailors compile knowledge about seasonal patterns, storm indicators, and wind cycles that govern oceanic travel. Barometric changes, cloud formations, and wave characteristics all become elements in sophisticated forecasting that allows captains to plan voyages with confidence previously impossible. Harbour installations across the expanding realm undergo massive improvements as increasing ship sizes demand deeper anchorages and more sophisticated port facilities. Carthage's harbours feature artificial breakwaters that protect ships from storms while offering space for hundreds of galleys simultaneously. Covered shipyards allow year-round construction and repair work, while specialized docks accommodate different types of craft and cargo operations. Storage facilities expand to handle the enormous quantities of goods flowing through these maritime links. Carthage's warehouses stretch for miles along the waterfront, their contents representing the wealth of 3 continents. Iberian silver shares space with Sicilian grain, while Sardinian metals await shipment alongside African ivory and exotic animals destined for ancestral markets. The famous Circle of Carthage emerges as a systematic approach to overseas expansion that transforms random exploration into coordinated strategy. Rather than establishing isolated outposts wherever opportunities arise, Carthaginian planners create interlocking webs of bases that support each other while extending their reach into the far-flung waters. The strategy begins with reconnaissance expeditions that map coastlines, identify resources, and assess indigenous responses to foreign presence. These preliminary missions establish temporary camps that serve as bases for more detailed exploration, while granting safe havens for ships caught in storms or pursued by enemies. Only after thorough preparation do permanent colonies follow. Each new settlement receives careful planning that considers its role within the broader system. Coastal locations offer harbors for the shipping that connects all communities, while inland positions control access to mineral resources or agricultural regions. Strategic islands serve as stepping stones for longer voyages, while offering secure bases that hostile land forces cannot easily attack. The integration demonstrates remarkable effectiveness as communities separated by hundreds of miles coordinate their activities to mutual advantage. Iberian mining operations yield silver that finances expansion elsewhere, while Sardinian agricultural surplus feeds populations in less fertile regions. Sicilian workshops produce manufactured goods that find markets within the entire federation, creating prosperity that benefits all participants. Social synthesis accelerates as these distant establishments develop their own identities while maintaining connections to their origins. Carthaginian art blends Tyrian customs with North African influences, creating distinctive styles that influence artistic development in the region. Architecture adapts Levantine principles to Atlantic materials and climates, producing buildings that serve the same functions as their predecessors while reflecting new environmental conditions. Religious practices evolve to meet the needs of communities that must maintain identity while adapting to foreign environments. Moloch, the deity who demands child sacrifice, acquires new attributes as protector of overseas ventures and guarantor of success in dangerous enterprises. His cult spreads among the distant establishments, granting spiritual unity that transcends political boundaries between different communities. The top hats that appear in every major settlement reflect both continuity with homeland customs and adaptation to Atlantic circumstances. These sacred precincts where children are sacrificed to ensure divine favor become larger and more elaborate than their Levantine predecessors, demonstrating the prosperity that overseas expansion has created, while revealing the risks that continue to threaten these ventures. Archaeological evidence from Carthaginian tophets shows thousands of urns containing cremated remains of infants and children, their inscriptions recording the hopes and fears of families who sacrificed their most precious possessions to secure divine protection for their communities. The scale of these operations far exceeds anything found in the ancestral homelands, suggesting that Atlantic communities face dangers that require unprecedented spiritual intervention. The goddess Tanit emerges as a distinctively Mediterranean deity who combines attributes of customary Astarte with characteristics adapted to North African conditions. Her symbols, the palm tree, the solar disk, the crescent moon, reflect environmental and social influences that would be foreign in the Levantine homeland. Yet her essential functions as protector of women and patron of commerce maintain continuity with ancestral customs. Temple architecture develops distinctive Atlantic characteristics while preserving Levantine religious functions. Carthaginian temples feature massive stone construction that rivals Egyptian monuments in scale and grandeur, yet their internal arrangements follow established patterns that ensure proper worship of hereditary deities. These buildings serve as community centers where social, economic, and religious activities intersect. Mining operations in Iberia reach industrial scales that dwarf previous extraction efforts anywhere in the ancient world. The silver mines of Andalusia employ thousands of workers, using advanced approaches that increase production while reducing costs. Hydraulic systems wash ore from hillsides, while sophisticated smelting operations purify metal to standards that command premium prices across the basin. The wealth generated by Iberian mining transforms the entire distant system as communities that had struggled to establish themselves suddenly possess resources that rival the richest homeland kingdoms. Carthage becomes a major power not merely through business success, but through control of silver production that supplies the financial foundation for political independence. Peninsular tin mining complements silver extraction as these Atlantic establishments gain control of resources essential for the entire ancient world. The combination of Iberian tin with copper from Cyprus or Sardinia allows them to produce alloys superior to any manufactured by competitors, giving their metal workers decisive advantages in both military and civilian markets. Agricultural development follows mining success as Iberian communities apply Levantine farming approaches to Atlantic soils and climates. Irrigation systems based on Mesopotamian models transform arid valleys into productive agricultural regions that export surplus food within the Federation. Olive cultivation adapts homeland varieties to distant conditions, creating oil production that rivals established sources. Gadir emerges as the crown jewel of peninsular establishments, its position beyond the Pillars of Hercules, making it the westernmost outpost of ancient civilization. The city's traders venture into the Atlantic, establishing business relationships with peoples who have never encountered Mediterranean civilizations. These contacts yield access to resources, amber, tin, exotic animals, that command enormous prices in established markets. Atlantic navigation requires approaches that differ dramatically from those used in the enclosed basin. Ocean tides, unfamiliar currents, and different weather patterns force Gadir's sailors to innovate constantly. Their success in mastering these challenges demonstrates that distant communities have achieved technological capabilities that surpass their homeland origins in some areas. The legendary voyage of Himilco explores the Atlantic coasts of Iberia and Gaul, establishing trading relationships with Celtic peoples who control tin sources essential for alloy production. These expeditions extend the Federation's reach far beyond customary limits, while furnishing geographic knowledge that will influence ancient understanding of the world's extent. Sardinian establishments focus on agricultural production that feeds growing Mediterranean populations while generating surplus for export to less fertile regions. The island's strategic position makes it an ideal distribution center for goods flowing between Iberia, North Africa, and Sicily. Its harbors accommodate the largest ships in the fleet, while its inland regions produce grain, livestock, and other necessities. The resistance encountered in Sardinia from indigenous Nuragic peoples leads to the development of military approaches specifically adapted to island warfare. These conflicts produce tactical innovations that become useful across the Federation, as colonies encounter resistance from native populations who resent foreign encroachment on their hereditary territories. Corsican ventures complement Sardinian operations while granting additional security for shipping routes that connect Iberian colonies with homeland markets. The island's mountainous terrain and fierce inhabitants make permanent settlement difficult, but strategic coastal bases offer essential services for ships traveling longer routes. Balearic operations focus on controlling strategic islands that command approaches to peninsular communities. These bases deliver security for shipping, while offering launch points for further expansion into previously unexplored regions. The island's inhabitants, famous for their skill with slings, initially resist foreign presence, but gradually accept beneficial trading relationships. Sicilian establishments mature into major centers that rival their homeland origins in wealth and sophistication. The island's agricultural productivity, combined with its strategic position, makes it an essential component of the Mediterranean system. Sicilian grain feeds populations across the region, while the island's workshops produce manufactured goods that compete successfully with Levantine products. Competition with Greek colonists in Sicily creates the first major challenge to Atlantic expansion, as both civilizations seek to control the island's resources and strategic position. These conflicts establish patterns of rivalry that will influence relationships between different Mediterranean powers for centuries. The resolution requires diplomatic skills that balance business interests with military necessities. Artistic customs flourish in Sicilian workshops, where homeland approaches encounter Atlantic materials and aesthetic influences. Pottery produced in these centers combines established forms with innovative decorations that reflect local tastes and available materials. Metalwork incorporates Iberian silver and regional artistic practices to create objects that command premium prices across the basin. The development of distinctive Mediterranean artistic styles reflects the confidence that successful expansion has generated. Rather than merely copying Levantine models, Atlantic artisans create new forms that serve local needs while maintaining connections to ancestral practices. These innovations eventually influence artistic development in the homeland cities as exchange flows in both directions. Economic integration reaches unprecedented levels as the Mediterranean Federation develops specialized production that serves the entire system. Iberian mining supplies precious metals. Sardinian agriculture produces food. Sicilian workshops manufacture goods, while North African establishments contribute exotic products and serve as distribution centers for trans-Saharan commerce. This specialization creates interdependence that strengthens the entire confederation, while making individual colonies vulnerable to disruptions elsewhere. The system's complexity requires coordination that challenges established city-state independence, leading to the development of new political structures that balance local autonomy with federation-wide cooperation. Business law evolves to handle the unprecedented complexity of transactions that span multiple jurisdictions and social boundaries. Standardized contracts, weights, and measures facilitate commerce between communities that might otherwise struggle to conduct trade. Credit systems allow value transfer across vast distances without the risks associated with transporting precious metals. The development of commercial codes that govern relationships between different settlements establishes precedents that influence legal development across the ancient world. These innovations demonstrate that mercantile civilizations can create institutions that serve their needs more effectively than conventional political structures based on territorial control. Maritime law emerges to govern activities on waters that no single authority controls, but where disputes frequently arise between competing interests. Rules governing salvage, piracy, and business disputes furnish frameworks for resolving conflicts without resort to warfare that would disrupt the commerce upon which all communities depend. Military organization adapts to the challenges of defending scattered establishments against land-based enemies, while maintaining security for shipping routes that connect the entire federation. Established emphasis on naval forces continues, but distant colonies also develop land armies capable of protecting their territories against indigenous resistance and foreign invasion. The Carthaginian military becomes the most sophisticated in the Atlantic world, combining homeland tactical knowledge with Mediterranean innovations and indigenous fighting methods. Their armies incorporate troops from across North Africa, creating military forces that reflect the social diversity of their expanding territories, while maintaining professional standards that rival any contemporary force. Mercenary service becomes a major industry as distant establishments recruit fighters from across the region to serve in conflicts that require military expertise beyond what local populations can supply. These professional soldiers serve multiple employers while developing loyalties that transcend conventional ethnic and political boundaries. Naval technology continues advancing as larger ships require more sophisticated weapons and defensive systems. Ramming tactics evolve into complex maneuvers that coordinate multiple galleys in attacks on enemy formations. Artillery systems mounted on craft deliver long-range capabilities that give naval forces advantages over coastal fortifications. The development of specialized naval craft reflects the diverse requirements of maritime operations that range from commerce protection to exploration and military conquest. Fast scout ships furnish intelligence about enemy movements, while heavy warships engage hostile fleets. Specialized transports carry troops and supplies for overseas expeditions, while exploration galleys venture into unknown waters seeking new opportunities. By 700 years before the Christian era, the Atlantic establishments have created a civilization that rivals any in the ancient world. Carthage commands resources that exceed those of most homeland kingdoms, while Iberian colonies control mining operations that influence monetary systems across the basin. The Federation has achieved integration that allows coordinated responses to challenges while maintaining the flexibility that comes from political diversity. Yet success attracts attention from powers that view this prosperity as a threat to their own interests. Roman expansion in central Italy threatens Sicilian communities, while Etruscan naval forces compete for control of Mediterranean shipping routes. Most ominously, Assyrian revival in the east pressures the homeland cities that remain the spiritual and political centers of the entire civilization. The children of the Crimson Die have succeeded beyond anyone's dreams during the dark centuries following Bronze Age collapse. From desperate refugees seeking new homes, they have become masters of waters that span continents. Their ships carry goods, ideas, and people across distances that previous generations considered impossible to traverse. Their colonies have created prosperity that transforms entire regions, while preserving artistic practices that connect them to their origins. The federation they have built represents a new form of civilization, one based on voluntary cooperation rather than imperial conquest, on business integration rather than political domination, on social adaptation rather than forced assimilation. Whether this remarkable achievement can survive the challenges that success inevitably attracts remains to be determined. The greatest tests lie ahead as the masters of the sea confront powers that prefer conquest to commerce and territory to confederations. The Assyrian war machine rolls westward like a thunderstorm consuming the horizon. From the ziggurats of Nineveh, Sargon II's successors gaze upon maps that show their empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt. Yet one prize remains tantalizingly beyond their grasp. The island fortress that has grown rich from centuries of seafaring commerce sits in its harbour like a pearl in an oyster shell, protected by waters that no Mesopotamian army can cross. King Luli stands atop his palace walls, watching banners advance along the mainland shore. The year is 701 before Christ, and Sennacherib's armies have already crushed Jerusalem's rebellion and scattered the forces of Egypt's pharaoh. Yet the sea remains the island's shield, as it has for generations past. No war engine can breach waves, no cavalry can charge across harbour waters, no infantry can scale walls built on bedrock 40 feet above the tide. This confrontation crystallizes a fundamental tension that has been building throughout the 7th century. The Empire of Mesopotamia represents the ultimate expression of territorial conquest. Vast armies marching across endless plains. War engines reducing settlement after settlement to rubble. Royal inscriptions recording the submission of countless peoples. Yet here stands the island fortress, defying this seemingly irresistible force, not through military might, but through geographical advantage and naval supremacy. The blockade that follows becomes a contest between two incompatible forms of power. Engineers build causeways and towers, attempting to extend their land-based advantages into the oceanic realm. Sailors launch night raids that burn these constructions before they can threaten the island's stronghold. Catapults hurl stones across the narrow channel, while fire ships strike back at any vessel that ventures too close to the harbour mouth. For 5 years, the blockade continues, neither side able to achieve decisive advantage. Mesopotamian persistence slowly extends earthworks into deeper water, while island ingenuity finds new ways to disrupt these efforts. The workshops produce weapons specifically designed for naval warfare, bronze-tipped arrows that penetrate armor at close range, incendiary mixtures that ignite enemy vessels, iron chains that can entangle oars and disable attacking craft. Most remarkably, survival depends not merely on the island position, but on connections that span the entire basin. While armies control the mainland, merchants maintain contact with colonies from Spain to Cyprus. Ships arrive under cover of darkness, their holds filled with grain from Sicily, silver from Andalusia, and mercenaries from across the known world. The blockade becomes a test of whether territorial empire can strangle oceanic commerce. The resolution comes through diplomacy rather than conquest. Sennacherib, faced with rebellions elsewhere in his vast territories, accepts a tribute arrangement that preserves independence while acknowledging supremacy. The island agrees to annual payments that demonstrate submission without surrendering the naval connections that generate its wealth. Both sides claim victory, while avoiding the catastrophic losses that total war would demand. This compromise establishes a pattern that will govern relationships between Mesopotamian empires and seafaring states for the next century and a half. Rulers content themselves with tribute payments and formal acknowledgement of their authority. Kings maintain practical independence while accepting diplomatic humiliation that preserves their essential interests. The arrangement allows continued remarkable expansion of influence throughout the basin, while technically remaining a vassal. Colonies in Spain increase their mining operations, sending silver eastward that helps pay the tribute demanded by Mesopotamian overlords. Carthaginian independence grows as the North African metropolis develops its own relationships with indigenous peoples and rival powers. Sidon's fate provides a stark contrast to diplomatic success. When the rival settlement attempts outright rebellion in 677 before Christ, Esarhaddon's response demonstrates power at its most brutal. The blockade lasts 3 years, ending with complete destruction and the deportation of the entire population to distant regions of the empire. Where Sidon once prospered, only rubble remains as a warning to other settlements that might contemplate resistance. The destruction sends shockwaves throughout the Phoenician world. Sidon had been the greatest rival, its workshops producing goods that competed in every major market. Its sudden elimination leaves the island fortress as the undisputed leader of the remaining states, while demonstrating the terrible consequences of failed rebellion. The lesson is clear. Survival requires accommodation with power, regardless of the cost to pride or independence. Yet Sidon's destruction also creates opportunities that the island exploits with characteristic commercial ingenuity. Displaced craftsmen seek refuge in other settlements, bringing their skills and customer relationships to new workshops. The fortress absorbs many of these refugees, using their expertise to expand production, while gaining access to markets that Sidon had previously controlled. What begins as a humanitarian crisis becomes an economic opportunity. The integration of Sidonian refugees transforms society in ways that extend far beyond simple population growth. Master craftsmen introduce new techniques for working metals and glass, while experienced navigators bring knowledge of sea routes and foreign ports. Most importantly, merchants carry with them relationships with customers throughout the basin, connections that can be exploited to expand commercial reach. Religious practices evolve as displaced populations bring their gods and customs to new homes. Sidonian deities merge with local counterparts, creating syncretic cults that reflect the cosmopolitan nature of these oceanic societies. Temple architecture adapts to accommodate larger and more diverse congregations, while religious festivals incorporate elements from multiple traditions. The Hebrew connection deepens during this period as political instability in the Levant creates new opportunities for cooperation between the fortress and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. King Hiram II maintains the alliance with Jerusalem that his predecessors established with Solomon, providing naval expertise and exotic materials in exchange for agricultural products and territorial cooperation. The relationship proves mutually beneficial as Hebrew kingdoms gain access to oceanic connections, while the island secures agricultural supplies and inland allies who can provide military support if needed. When armies threaten Jerusalem, vessels evacuate refugees who might otherwise face death or deportation. When Mesopotamian forces later threaten the fortress, Hebrew allies provide intelligence and supplies that help sustain the island's stronghold. Biblical texts preserve remarkable details about this cooperation, describing artisans who work on the Second Temple and Hebrew merchants who participate in basin commerce. The prophet Ezekiel's condemnation of wealth provides inadvertent testimony to prosperity and the extent of trading connections. Even hostile sources acknowledge supremacy in naval affairs. The relationship transcends mere political alliance as cultural exchange enriches both civilizations. Hebrew monotheism influences Phoenician religious thought, while Phoenician alphabetic writing continues to shape Hebrew literary development. Commercial law develops through interaction between different legal traditions, creating standardized practices that facilitate trade across cultural boundaries. Power from Babylon rises as authority from Assyria weakens, bringing new challenges that test diplomacy even more severely. Nebuchadnezzar II views wealth and independence as provocations that threaten his imperial prestige. Unlike his predecessors, who accepted tribute as adequate submission, the king demands complete control over oceanic commerce that has enriched the fortress for centuries. The 13-year blockade that begins in 585 before Christ becomes the most severe test ever faced. Persistence surpasses even earlier determination, while techniques improve through years of experience reducing fortified settlements throughout the empire. Yet the island position remains as formidable as ever, forcing Nebuchadnezzar to attempt innovations that stretch Mesopotamian military engineering to its limits. The blockade reveals both the strengths and limitations of the seafaring strategy. The ability to maintain contact with colonies allows continued resistance long after any mainland settlement would have surrendered. Ships arrive regularly with supplies and reinforcements, while vessels launch raids against positions along the coast. Yet the blockade gradually tightens as naval forces, built with Phoenician expertise from conquered settlements, begin challenging supremacy in nearby waters. Technological innovation accelerates as both sides develop new weapons and tactics specifically for this prolonged conflict. Engineers construct floating platforms that allow war engines to operate in deeper water, while defenders create new types of incendiary weapons that can destroy these constructions. Artillery becomes more sophisticated as both armies learn to calculate ranges and trajectories across water. The human cost mounts steadily as years pass without decisive resolution. The population endures hardships that test the limits of urban resilience: food shortages when blockades interrupt supply ships, disease outbreaks that spread rapidly through crowded neighborhoods, constant bombardment that makes normal life impossible. Yet survival depends on maintaining resistance that preserves essential character as an independent naval power. Carthaginian independence crystallizes during these years as the North African metropolis assumes leadership of the Western Basin connections, while the island struggles for survival. What began as a colony, dependent on its mother settlement, gradually becomes the center of a separate sphere of influence that spans from Spain to Sicily. The transformation occurs so gradually that contemporaries barely notice. Yet by the blockade's end, Carthage has achieved practical autonomy that will shape basin history for centuries. The resolution comes through exhaustion rather than conquest. After 13 years of warfare that has cost both sides enormous resources, the island and Babylon agree to terms that preserve existence while acknowledging supremacy. The compromise resembles earlier arrangements: tribute payments and formal submission in exchange for practical independence in naval affairs. Yet the blockade's effects extend far beyond its immediate political resolution. The fortress emerges from the conflict permanently weakened, its population reduced and its wealth depleted by years of warfare. The basin connections that had centered on the island begin reorienting toward Carthage and other Western centers that proved more reliable during the crisis. Most importantly, the blockade demonstrates that even the strongest naval positions can be threatened by sufficiently determined land-based powers. The conquest of Babylon in 539 before Christ brings new opportunities and challenges as Cyrus the Great establishes an empire that dwarfs even earlier achievements. Unlike his Mesopotamian predecessors, the king shows remarkable tolerance for local customs and institutions, allowing subject peoples to maintain their religious practices and traditional forms of government within the imperial framework. For the island, rule offers relief from the constant threat of blockade warfare that has dominated the past 2 centuries. The empire values naval expertise and commercial connections that can contribute to imperial prosperity, rather than viewing them as threats to territorial authority. Vessels join fleets that operate throughout the basin, while merchants gain access to markets that span from India to Greece. The arrangement proves beneficial for both parties, as territorial control complements Phoenician naval capabilities. Armies secure land routes and provide stability that encourages commerce, while Phoenician connections transport goods and information across distances that would otherwise remain isolated from imperial administration. The combination creates prosperity that exceeds what either civilization could achieve independently. Cultural synthesis reaches new levels of sophistication as administrative practices blend with Phoenician commercial expertise. Standardized coinage replaces the barter systems that had dominated basin trade, while legal traditions provide frameworks for resolving disputes between merchants from different cultural backgrounds. Most importantly, tolerance for religious diversity allows Phoenician deities to maintain their traditional roles while acknowledging imperial authority. The period of rule allows recovery from the devastation of the earlier blockade, while adapting to new political realities that favor cooperation over resistance. Workshops resume production at levels that rival their pre-blockade prosperity, while harbors once again welcome vessels from throughout the known world. Yet the recovery occurs within constraints that limit independence in ways that earlier generations would have found intolerable. The transformation reflects broader changes throughout the basin, as the age of independent states gradually gives way to imperial systems that integrate vast territories under unified authority. The fortress remains prosperous and influential, but its influence operates within frameworks that determine the ultimate direction of policy. The settlement that once defied the world's greatest empires has learned to thrive as a valued component of an even greater imperial system. Yet this accommodation preserves the essential elements that have made Phoenician civilization unique throughout its history. Naval connections continue operating across vast distances. Alphabetic writing continues spreading to new populations. Commercial practices continue evolving to meet changing circumstances. Most importantly, the cultural adaptability that has allowed Phoenicians to survive and prosper in countless different environments enables them to maintain their identity, even while accepting foreign political authority. The island fortress that withstood earlier blockades has discovered a different form of strength: the ability to contribute essential services to imperial systems, while preserving the commercial and naval expertise that justifies continued autonomy. This discovery will prove crucial as new challenges emerge from the West, where Greek expansion threatens to disrupt the basin balance that has allowed Phoenician civilization to flourish for so many centuries. The children of the Crimson Dye have learned that survival sometimes requires accepting subordination to preserve what matters most. Their ships still cross distant seas, their merchants still profit from exotic trades, their colonies still prosper in foreign lands. Yet all these activities now occur within imperial frameworks that previous generations would have resisted to the death. Whether this adaptation represents wisdom or surrender remains to be determined as new powers arise to challenge even the greatest supremacy. The morning breeze carries incense smoke from North African temples as Hannibal Margot surveys his fleet preparing for departure to Sicily. 2 centuries have passed since Cyrus entered Babylon, and the world has transformed beyond recognition. Where once the children of the Crimson Dye served as valued allies within Persian dominion, they now command their own destiny as masters of the Western waters. The year is 480 before Christ, and Carthage has evolved from colony into supremacy. Behind him, the greatest harbour in North Africa bustles with activity that dwarfs even the legendary ports of the eastern homeland. Kinkarems stretch their bronze rams toward distant horizons, while merchant vessels unload treasures from beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Spanish silver mingles with British tin, African ivory shares space with Baltic amber, and Sardinian grain feeds populations that span 3 continents. This transformation represents far more than simple territorial expansion. While the ancestral ports continue their ancient business under watchful oversight of successive rulers, their Western offspring have achieved something unprecedented: the creation of a seafaring dominion that rivals any land-based power in scope and wealth. Carthage commands not through conquest, but through trade, not through occupation, but through alliance, not through taxation, but through mutual prosperity. The evolution began during the Dark Years, when Nebuchadnezzar's armies pressed against the island fortress. As Eastern connections wavered under imperial pressure, Western colonies learned to sustain themselves through their own resources and initiatives. What started as necessity gradually became preference as distance from homeland constraints allowed experimentation with new forms of organization and authority. North African society develops along lines that would astonish visitors from the rigid hierarchies of Eastern dynasties. While traditional monarchies depend on hereditary succession and divine sanction, Carthage creates institutions that blend aristocratic leadership with mercantile expertise. The Council of 104 emerges as the supreme authority, its members selected not for royal blood, but for proven success in oceanic ventures and business enterprises. The sufferts, who serve as executive magistrates, gain their positions through election rather than inheritance, their authority derived from demonstrated competence rather than traditional privilege. These innovations create flexibility that allows rapid adaptation to changing circumstances, while maintaining stability that encourages long-term planning. The system demonstrates remarkable effectiveness at coordinating activities across vast distances and diverse populations. Religious life reflects this institutional innovation, as African deities acquire attributes that distinguish them from their Eastern origins. Moloch evolves beyond his traditional role as recipient of child sacrifice to become patron of business ventures and guarantor of imperial success. His temples serve as centers for negotiating contracts and resolving disputes between traders from different cultural backgrounds. Tanit emerges as a uniquely Western goddess, whose cult spreads throughout the sphere of influence. Her symbols, the Ankh, the solar disk, the open hands, represent life, prosperity, and protection that extend to all who participate in African trade. Unlike Eastern deities who demand exclusive loyalty, Tanit welcomes worshippers from every cultural tradition while maintaining her essential North African identity. The Topets that appear in every major settlement continue the practice of child sacrifice while adapting it to imperial needs. These installations become larger and more elaborate than their Eastern predecessors, reflecting both the prosperity that dominion generates and the unprecedented risks that imperial responsibilities entail. The inscriptions record not merely individual hopes and fears, but collective anxieties about maintaining dominance over vast territories and diverse populations. Naval technology reaches unprecedented sophistication, as African shipyards develop vessels that dwarf anything constructed during earlier periods. The Quinquereme represents the pinnacle of ancient oceanic engineering, a warship 150 feet long with 5 banks of oars that can ram enemy vessels while carrying catapults capable of destroying coastal fortifications. These oceanic giants require crews of over 400 men, their coordination demanding training and discipline that transforms ordinary sailors into components of precise war machines. The bronze rams that crown their prows can shatter any hull, while the towers that rise from their decks provide platforms for archers and artillery specialists who rain death upon enemy forces. Construction techniques advance to accommodate ships of unprecedented size and complexity. African shipyards create assembly methods that allow rapid production of standardized vessels while maintaining quality that ensures reliability during extended campaigns. The forests of Lebanon and Spain provide timber, while Sardinian iron supplies fittings that hold these wooden giants together through basin storms and enemy attacks. Navigation evolves beyond celestial observation to incorporate systematic mapping that records currents, wind patterns, and seasonal variations throughout the known world. African charts become the most accurate available, their information closely guarded secrets that provide decisive advantages during campaigns and business competition. Harbour installations throughout the sphere undergo massive expansion as increasing ship sizes demand deeper anchorages and more sophisticated facilities. Carthage's war harbour features covered docks that can accommodate over 200 warships while protecting them from weather and enemy observation. The circular design allows rapid deployment while providing maximum security for vessels that represent enormous investments in materials and training. The famous Kothon creates an artificial lagoon where the entire fleet can anchor in complete safety while remaining invisible to hostile observers. Gates control access, while towers provide defensive positions that can withstand extended bombardment. The installation represents engineering achievement that rivals any contemporary construction throughout the ancient world. Spanish operations reach industrial scales that transform the entire Western economy. The silver mines of New Carthage employ tens of thousands of workers, using techniques that extract unprecedented quantities of precious metal. Hydraulic systems wash entire hillsides, while sophisticated smelting operations produce silver so pure that it becomes the standard by which all other precious metals are measured. The wealth generated by Spanish mining provides the financial foundation for African expansion throughout the Western Basin. Silver pays for mercenary armies that defend territories, finances ship construction that maintains oceanic supremacy, and purchases alliances that extend influence without requiring conquest. Spanish agricultural development complements mining success as settlers apply advanced irrigation techniques to transform arid landscapes into productive farmland. Olive groves and vineyards spread across Andalusian hills, while grain production in the Guadalquivir Valley feeds populations throughout the Western Dominion. The combination of mining wealth and agricultural surplus creates prosperity that supports expansion and population growth. Sardinian settlements mature into major agricultural and industrial centres that contribute essential resources to the growing dominion. The island's strategic position makes it an ideal distribution point for goods flowing between Spain, North Africa, and Sicily, while its fertile valleys produce surplus grain that feeds urban populations in less productive regions. The resistance encountered from indigenous Sardinian peoples leads to the development of tactics specifically adapted to island warfare and guerrilla resistance. These innovations become valuable throughout the sphere as African forces encounter similar challenges in Sicily, Spain, and North Africa. The experience creates professional capabilities that distinguish armies from traditional citizen militias. Corsican ventures provide additional strategic depth while offering bases for operations in the northern basin. The island's position commands shipping routes between Spain and Italy, making control essential for maintaining communications throughout the Dominion. The mountainous terrain and fierce indigenous resistance require diplomatic skills that balance pressure with business incentives. Balearic operations focus on controlling islands that command approaches to Spanish territories, while providing advanced warning of hostile forces approaching from the east. The famous Balearic slingers become essential components of African armies, their projectile skills proving devastatingly effective against both infantry and cavalry formations. Sicilian expansion creates the first major confrontation between African and Greek interests, as both civilizations seek to control the island's agricultural wealth and strategic position. The conflicts that result establish patterns of rivalry that will influence basin politics for centuries, while demonstrating African capabilities against sophisticated opponents. The battles of Himera and Selinus showcase tactical innovations while revealing the limitations of traditional Greek methods when confronted by enemies who combine superior resources with flexible strategies. African armies incorporate troops from throughout North Africa and Spain, creating forces that reflect the cultural diversity of their dominion, while maintaining professional standards that ensure effectiveness. Greek resistance proves more formidable than indigenous opposition encountered elsewhere, forcing commanders to create new approaches that balance pressure with diplomatic negotiation. The resolution requires partitioning Sicily between Greek and African spheres of influence, establishing precedents for arrangements that preserve both civilizations' essential interests. The Etruscan alliance emerges as a crucial component of African strategy in the Central Basin, as both powers recognize their common interest in containing Greek expansion. The partnership provides Carthage with bases for operations against Rome, while offering Etruscans access to Spanish metals and North African products that enhance their own business capabilities. Oceanic cooperation between African and Etruscan fleets creates supremacy in the Western Basin that challenges Greek attempts to establish colonies beyond their traditional spheres of influence. Joint expeditions explore Atlantic coasts, while combined forces protect shipping routes that connect Spain with North Africa and Italy. The relationship demonstrates African diplomatic sophistication, as alliance terms recognize Etruscan independence while securing strategic objectives. Unlike land-based dynasties that demand complete submission, Carthage creates partnerships that serve mutual interests while preserving the autonomy that allies require for effective cooperation. Agricultural innovations throughout the Dominion reflect the synthesis of techniques from multiple cultural traditions, as administrators adapt methods from Spain, North Africa, and the eastern homeland to local conditions throughout their territories. Irrigation systems based on Spanish models transform Sicilian valleys, while North African crops adapt to basin climates. The Mago brothers compile agricultural treatises that become standard references throughout the ancient world, their observations incorporating knowledge from across the known world into systematic guides for improving productivity. These texts preserve techniques for crop rotation, soil improvement, and pest control that represent the accumulated wisdom of multiple civilizations. Livestock breeding programs create new varieties of animals specifically adapted to different climatic regions, while maintaining characteristics that ensure productivity and disease resistance. African horses become prized throughout the basin for their speed and endurance, while North African cattle provide meat and dairy products that support urban populations. Exploration beyond the Pillars of Hercules extends African knowledge far into the Atlantic, as expeditions seek new sources of metals and exotic products, while establishing contact with peoples previously unknown to basin civilizations. Hanno's voyage along the African coast reaches regions that will not be revisited by European explorers for over a millennium. These Atlantic expeditions establish trading relationships that provide access to gold, ivory, and exotic animals that command enormous prices in traditional markets. The knowledge gained influences ancient understanding of world geography while demonstrating oceanic capabilities that exceed anything achieved by contemporary civilizations. Himilco's northern voyage explores European Atlantic coasts, establishing contact with Celtic peoples who control tin sources essential for bronze production. These relationships provide alternatives to traditional suppliers, while extending African influence into regions that remain largely unknown to other basin powers. The expeditions require technological innovations that push navigation and shipbuilding beyond their previous limits. Ocean voyages demand vessels capable of withstanding conditions far more severe than anything encountered in the enclosed basin, while navigation techniques must account for tides and currents that differ dramatically from familiar patterns. Economic integration throughout the sphere reaches levels of sophistication that create the first truly international economy in human history. Standardized coinage facilitates trade between regions with different local systems, while law provides frameworks for resolving disputes between traders from diverse cultural backgrounds. Banking systems develop to handle the complexity of transactions that span multiple territories and involve different currencies and legal systems. Letters of credit allow value transfer across vast distances without the risks associated with transporting precious metals, while insurance arrangements protect traders against losses from piracy and natural disasters. The scale of operations requires administrative capabilities that exceed anything previously attempted, as African officials coordinate activities across territories that span from Spain to Sicily. Communication systems ensure rapid transmission of information, while transportation infrastructure supports the movement of goods and personnel throughout the Dominion. By the 4th century before Christ, Carthage has achieved what no previous civilization attempted: the creation of an oceanic dominion that spans continents while preserving the cultural diversity and local autonomy that land-based conquest typically destroys. The achievement represents a new form of imperial organization that influences political development throughout the ancient world. Yet success creates new challenges as land-based powers recognize African prosperity as a threat to their own ambitions. Roman expansion in central Italy threatens interests in Sicily, while Greek revival under Alexander's successors challenges dominance in the eastern basin. Most ominously, the very success of the Western sphere creates expectations and responsibilities that may exceed even African capabilities. The children of the Crimson Dye have transformed from scattered refugees into masters of a dominion that rivals any land-based power in wealth and influence. Their ships command waters that span 3 continents. Their traders profit from business that connects the known world. Their colonies prosper in territories that previous generations could only dream of reaching. Yet the transformation also creates vulnerabilities that land-based dynasties do not face. Oceanic supremacy depends on maintaining technological superiority that enemies constantly seek to overcome. Business prosperity requires peaceful conditions that hostile powers can disrupt through warfare. Most critically, imperial responsibilities demand resources and commitments that may conflict with the flexibility and adaptability that have made Phoenician civilization successful throughout its history. The ultimate test approaches as new powers arise to challenge African dominance. Whether the oceanic dominion can survive confrontation with land-based forces that possess different advantages and operate according to different principles remains to be determined. The greatest trial awaits as the masters of the sea prepare to face enemies who prefer conquest to trade and occupation to business partnership. The great ram, Helepolis, thunders against the mole that Alexander's engineers have thrown across the waters, separating the mainland from Tyre's island fortress. After 7 months of siege, the young Macedonian king's patience has evaporated like morning dew under the Syrian sun. Behind him stretch the corpses of empires. Persian satraps lie dead in the ruins of their palaces, while the treasures of Babylon fill his war chests. Yet here stands this maritime stronghold, defiant as a reef against the tide of conquest that has swept away every other power from the Aegean to the Indus. From his palace walls, King Asimilcus watches the stone and timber causeway creep ever closer to his domain. Each day brings fresh horrors, Macedonian catapults hurling boulders that shatter buildings, siege towers rolling forward on massive wheels, and the screams of civilians caught between the hammer of assault and the anvil of resistance. The year is 332 before Christ, and the island that has weathered Assyrian fury and Babylonian persistence faces its greatest trial at the hands of a 24-year-old conqueror who has never known defeat. The siege represents far more than one city's struggle for survival. The Macedonian campaign against Tyre marks the climactic confrontation between two fundamentally different visions of power. The territorial conquest that seeks to possess every land beneath the sun, and the maritime independence that profits through connection rather than domination. The outcome will determine whether the children of the Crimson Dye can preserve their ancient way of life in a world increasingly dominated by land-based dynasties. The king's engineers face challenges that would have daunted lesser commanders. The channel separating Tyre from the mainland stretches nearly half a mile across, waters 20 feet deep, a natural moat that has protected the island for centuries. Yet the Macedonian ruler possesses resources that previous besiegers could never match. His armies carry tools and expertise gathered from across the known world, while his treasury holds wealth stripped from Persian capitals. The causeway grows through back-breaking labor as thousands of workers dump stone, timber, and rubble into the depths. Cedar logs from Lebanese forests provide the framework, while stones from ruined cities form the foundation. Most gruesomely, the corpses of Persian defenders add bulk to the construction, as the conqueror demonstrates his willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Tyrian resistance adapts to each new threat with ingenuity, born of desperation. Fire ships launched under cover of darkness burn sections of the causeway before they can be completed. Divers swimming beneath the surface cut anchor cables and sabotage siege engines. Most dramatically, bronze-plated vessels ram the growing mole, with rams designed to shatter stone and timber. The psychological warfare proves as intense as the physical combat. The Macedonian crucifix captured Tyrian sailors within sight of the city walls, while Tyrian defenders hurl the heads of enemy prisoners from their battlements. The siege becomes a contest of wills as much as engineering, each side seeking to break the other's determination through displays of brutal resolve. Tyrian diplomacy seeks relief that never arrives. Messages sent to Carthage beg for naval intervention that could break the blockade and restore communication with the wider world. Yet the North African metropolis faces its own challenges, as Italian expansion threatens Western interests, while Greek resurgence under the conqueror's successors pressures Eastern territories. The response reveals the transformation that has occurred over the past 2 centuries, where once Carthage would have sacrificed everything to preserve its mother city. The Western power now calculates that intervention would risk its own survival for uncertain benefit. The decision to abandon Tyre marks the final break between Eastern origins and Western destiny. As winter approaches, the causeway nears completion, despite Tyrian efforts to delay its progress. Macedonian engineers solve each defensive innovation with countermeasures that demonstrate adaptability. Stone armor protects the mole from fire attacks, while enclosed galleries shield workers from arrows and catapults. Most crucially, The sheer scale of resources available to the army overwhelms Tyrian capacity for disruption. The final assault begins at dawn, with a coordination that reflects months of preparation. Siege towers roll across the completed causeway, while ships attack from every direction simultaneously. Catapults pound the walls from land and sea as assault troops scale ladders under cover of massive shields. The defenders fight with the fury of those who know that defeat means extinction, yet Macedonian numbers and equipment prove decisive. The city falls street by street as soldiers pour through breached walls and gates. The slaughter that follows eliminates 8,000 inhabitants, while 30,000 more face slavery in distant lands. King Azamilcus and his court die fighting in the palace as flames consume the building, where kings have ruled for centuries. The massacre continues for days, as royal rage demands complete obliteration of the city that dared resist his will. The destruction transcends mere military victory to become cultural annihilation. Temples built over centuries burn to their foundations, while libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of generations disappear in smoke. The harbour installations that made Tyre the wonder of the ancient world sink beneath rubble and ash. Most tragically, the craftsmen whose skills created treasures for kings and pharaohs perish, along with the knowledge they carried. Yet even as Tyre dies, its influence spreads through the very army that destroys it. Macedonian soldiers marvel at the city's wealth and sophistication, carrying tales of maritime achievements to every corner of the expanding realm. The siege techniques developed against Tyre become standard methods that successors use to reduce other fortified cities. Most ironically, the destruction of independence accelerates the spread of culture throughout the Hellenistic world. The survivors who escape the massacre carry their traditions to new homes, where distance from the ruins allows gradual recovery. Sidon accepts Macedonian overlordship while preserving essential elements of identity. Smaller coastal settlements adapt to Greek political structures while maintaining their seafaring expertise. Most significantly, the Western territories centered on Carthage continue their expansion as the last inheritors of this ancient civilization. The conqueror's death in Babylon 9 years later creates opportunities for revival as his realm fragments into competing kingdoms ruled by his generals. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria, and the Antigonids in Macedonia all recognize the value of commercial expertise while competing for their loyalty. This competition allows surviving communities to recover much of their independence by playing rival powers against each other. Sidon emerges as the leading eastern city as Seleucid kings grant privileges that restore much of its former prosperity. The city's workshops resume production of goods that command premium prices throughout the Hellenistic world, while its merchants re-establish trading relationships that had been disrupted by the campaigns. Yet the recovery occurs within Greek political frameworks that limit independence in ways that previous generations would have found intolerable. The adaptation demonstrates resilience while revealing how thoroughly the world has changed. Where once independent city-states competed for commercial advantage, now client kingdoms serve the political interests of Hellenistic monarchs. Culture survives through accommodation rather than autonomy, preserving essential traditions while accepting foreign political control. Religious practices evolve to incorporate Greek elements while maintaining essential characteristics. Melkart acquires attributes of Heracles while preserving his role as protector of maritime ventures. Astarte merges with Aphrodite while continuing to patronize business enterprises. The synthesis creates hybrid cults that serve Greek political needs while satisfying spiritual requirements. Artistic traditions blend craftsmanship with Greek aesthetic preferences to create products that appeal to Hellenistic tastes while preserving technical excellence. Artisans working in Greek styles produce objects that combine the best elements of both traditions, demonstrating cultural adaptability that ensures continued relevance in changing markets. Meanwhile, Carthage reaches the zenith of its power as the undisputed master of the Western waters. Free from Eastern political constraints, the North African metropolis pursues expansion that extends its influence from Spain to Sicily while maintaining profitable relationships with powers throughout the known world. The city that began as a Tyrian colony has become the greatest naval power in the ancient world. The transformation of Carthage from dependent colony to independent power represents the ultimate success of adaptability, where Eastern cities struggle to maintain their identity within Greek political structures. Carthage creates its own imperial system that preserves culture while incorporating innovations from across the Mediterranean. African society develops institutions that blend traditional values with innovations required for imperial administration. The merchant aristocracy that governs Carthage combines business expertise with political sophistication, creating leadership capable of managing territories that span 3 continents. The system proves remarkably stable while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Religious life in Carthage reflects both continuity with traditions and adaptation to imperial needs. The cult of Moloch reaches its most elaborate expression in the massive Tophet, where thousands of children are sacrificed to ensure divine favor for imperial ventures. The scale of these sacrifices far exceeds anything practiced in the eastern homeland, reflecting both the prosperity that dominion generates and the unprecedented risks that imperial responsibilities entail. Tanit emerges as the supreme deity of the Western realm, her cult spreading to every territory under African control. Her temples serve as centers for administering imperial law, while providing spiritual guidance for subjects from diverse cultural backgrounds. The goddess becomes a unifying symbol that transcends ethnic and regional differences, while maintaining distinctively North African characteristics. The economic integration of the African dominion creates the most sophisticated business system in the ancient world. Standardized weights, measures, and coinage facilitate trade across vast distances, while uniform legal codes ensure consistent treatment of merchants regardless of their origins. The innovations influence development throughout the Mediterranean, while demonstrating the practical advantages of administrative methods. Yet success attracts challenges that threaten the entire system. Italian expansion brings a territorial power into direct conflict with African interests in Sicily. Unlike previous confrontations with city-states or tribal confederations, this struggle pits 2 fundamentally different imperial systems against each other in a conflict that only one can survive. The First Punic War erupts in 264 BC, when both powers intervene in Sicilian disputes that threaten their respective spheres of influence. The conflict reveals fundamental differences between approaches to dominion, as territorial conquest confronts maritime commerce in the first great clash between land and sea power. Italian persistence gradually overcomes African naval advantages as the Republic develops its own fleet while adapting ship designs to tactical preferences. The Corvus, a boarding bridge that allows infantry to fight naval battles as if they were land engagements, negates superiority in seamanship while playing to Italian strengths in close combat. The war's outcome demonstrates that maritime authority, however prosperous and sophisticated, cannot indefinitely resist determined territorial expansion. Italian willingness to accept enormous casualties and financial costs eventually overwhelms African resources, while adaptability neutralizes traditional advantages. The Second Punic War represents Carthage's desperate attempt to reverse its declining position through brilliant generalship and strategic innovation. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps and subsequent victories in Italy demonstrate that African military capabilities remain formidable when properly employed. Yet even tactical genius cannot overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting on enemy territory while maintaining communication across hostile seas. The war's climax at Zama reveals how completely the balance of power has shifted. Scipio's victory employs African tactical innovations against their creators, while Italian resources prove sufficient to sustain a global conflict that exhausts capabilities. The defeat ends any possibility of recovery while ensuring dominance throughout the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War represents less a military conflict than a deliberate campaign of extermination designed to eliminate any possibility of revival. Cato's famous declaration that Carthage must be destroyed reflects Italian determination to remove permanently any challenge to their supremacy. The siege that ends in 146 BC destroys more than a city. It eliminates the last major center of this ancient civilization. The population that created the greatest maritime authority in ancient history dies in flames, while their monuments crumble into ruins that will remain desolate for centuries. The libraries that preserved wisdom burn, while the harbors that sheltered the greatest fleets sink beneath demolition. Yet even as Carthage dies, influence spreads through the very power that destroys it. Italian adoption of agricultural techniques transforms farming, while business methods influence practices. The alphabet that began in coastal cities reaches its final form in Latin letters that will carry human knowledge across continents and centuries. The scattered survivors who escape the destruction carry their traditions to new homes where distance from the ruins allows gradual cultural adaptation. In Spain, settlements survive under Italian rule while maintaining elements of their original identity. In North Africa, communities preserve their language and customs within provincial structures. Most remarkably, this civilization achieves its ultimate victory through cultural transmission rather than political survival. The alphabet, the business practices, the navigation techniques, and the urban planning concepts that originated in their cities become fundamental elements of the classical world that succeeds them. The children of the Crimson Dye, who once defied Assyrian armies and Babylonian persistence, finally succumb to Italian determination and Greek cultural dominance. Yet their legacy transcends their political extinction, as innovations continue shaping human civilization long after the last city has fallen. The transformation is complete. The maritime civilization that connected 3 continents through commerce rather than conquest has yielded to territorial powers that prefer possession to partnership. Yet the connections they created, the techniques they developed, and the cultural synthesis they achieved become permanent features of the world they helped create. In defeat, they achieve a form of immortality that their conquerors can never claim. Their cities may lie in ruins, their fleets may rest on the ocean floor, their people may speak foreign languages, yet their fundamental contributions to human civilization prove indestructible. The last word belongs not to those who destroyed them, but to the countless generations who will benefit from their innovations without ever knowing their source. The last flames die in Carthage's harbour as dawn breaks over the smouldering ruins of the greatest maritime civilization the world has ever known. Roman soldiers pick through the rubble, searching for treasures among the ashes of libraries that once held the wisdom of centuries. Yet even as they destroy the final stronghold of this seafaring people, they unknowingly carry forward the very innovations that made their victims so formidable. The alphabet carved on their victory inscriptions, the navigation techniques guiding their ships home, the commercial practices filling their treasuries, all bear the invisible mark of those they have conquered. In the quiet villages scattered along what was once the Tyrian coast, old men speak in hushed tones of the days when their harbours sheltered fleets that spanned 3 continents. Their grandchildren, raised speaking Latin and Greek, barely understand these tales of purple-sailed ships and markets filled with Spanish silver. Yet they still launch their fishing boats at dawn, using techniques their ancestors learned from Tyrian captains, and they still mark their trade goods with letters whose forms stretch back to Bronze Age Byblos. This is how civilizations truly die, not in the thunder of siege engines or the flames of burning cities, but in the gradual forgetting of what once was. The children of the Crimson Dye have vanished from the rolls of history, their cities reduced to archaeological sites, their language preserved only in scattered inscriptions that scholars struggle to decipher. Yet their deepest achievements have become so fundamental to civilization that they pass unnoticed, like the air we breathe or the ground beneath our feet. The alphabet stands as their most enduring monument, though few who use it remember its origins. From the 22 symbols that Biblian scribes developed to record commercial transactions, has grown every writing system in the Western world. The letters that Greek merchants adapted to their own language became the foundation for Latin script, which in turn evolved into the alphabets that carry knowledge across every continent. Each letter preserves the memory of its creators in forms that reveal their maritime origins. The letter A began as Aleph, representing the ox that pulled ploughs and powered agriculture, yet its evolution shows the influence of seafaring peoples who valued cattle primarily as trade goods rather than agricultural tools. The letter B derives from Beth, the house, but its form reflects the shipbuilding tradition that created vessels as floating homes for crews venturing into unknown waters. More remarkably, the alphabet's spread follows the trade routes that once connected their commercial networks. From its origins in Levantine ports, alphabetic writing traveled west through Sicily and Sardinia to reach Spain and Gaul, while eastward expansion carried it through Cyprus and Asia Minor to the Black Sea coast. The same maritime highways that transported purple dye and Spanish silver also carried the intellectual innovation that would transform communication forever. The influence extends far beyond mere letter forms to encompass the fundamental concept of phonetic writing itself. Where earlier systems required hundreds of symbols to represent complex concepts, the alphabetic principle reduces all speech to combinations of simple sounds. This democratization of literacy breaks the monopoly that priestly and scribal classes held over written knowledge, allowing ordinary merchants, craftsmen, and farmers to record their own thoughts and experiences. Commercial practices developed in counting houses provide the foundation for every economic system that follows. The credit arrangements that allowed traders to transfer value across vast distances without physically transporting precious metals become the basis for modern banking. The standardized weights and measures that facilitated commerce between different cultural regions evolve into international systems that make global trade possible. Insurance, that essential component of maritime commerce, emerges directly from innovations designed to share the risks of overseas ventures among multiple investors. The idea that financial instruments can distribute danger while preserving opportunity proves so valuable that it spreads to every form of enterprise, from agriculture to manufacturing to exploration. The commercial law that developed to handle disputes between merchants from different cultural backgrounds creates precedents that influence legal systems throughout the classical world and beyond. The concept that agreements between parties can be enforced regardless of their ethnic origins or religious beliefs establishes principles of contract law that remain fundamental to international commerce. Navigation techniques perfected by captains venturing beyond sight of land become the foundation for all subsequent maritime exploration. The celestial methods that allowed accurate position finding using star observations enable every voyage of discovery that follows. When European explorers eventually cross the Atlantic to reach unknown continents, they navigate using principles that Tyrian sailors developed while establishing trading posts in Spain. The systematic mapping of currents, wind patterns, and seasonal variations throughout the Mediterranean provides the basis for understanding oceanic navigation everywhere. The knowledge that captains accumulated through generations of voyaging becomes the foundation upon which later explorers build their own discoveries. Harbour engineering and ship design, influenced by their innovations, transform maritime capabilities throughout the classical world. The artificial harbours that protected their fleets become models for port construction wherever people attempt to create safe anchorages. The hull designs that allowed their vessels to carry maximum cargo while maintaining seaworthiness influence shipbuilding traditions that persist for millennia. Urban planning concepts developed in their cities spread throughout the classical world as conquering armies and colonial administrators recognized the practical advantages of their innovations. The grid pattern that organized streets around commercial rather than ceremonial functions proves so efficient that it becomes standard for new city foundations throughout the Mediterranean. The integration of residential, commercial, and religious functions within urban environments creates models for city development that influence urban design long after their creators have vanished. The idea that cities should serve economic purposes, rather than merely providing defensive or ceremonial centers, transforms settlement patterns throughout the classical world. Cultural synthesis, that greatest achievement, becomes the defining characteristic of the Hellenistic and Roman civilizations that succeed them. The ability to adapt traditions from multiple sources while preserving essential identity provides the template for every successful multicultural society that follows. Religious syncretism, which allowed their deities to acquire attributes from local gods while maintaining their essential characteristics, becomes the standard method for integrating diverse populations within expanding empires. The Romans, who destroy the last strongholds, adopt these very techniques to manage their own multi-ethnic territories. Artistic traditions that blended influences from multiple cultures while creating distinctive local styles establish patterns that influence aesthetic development throughout the classical world. The luxury goods that their workshops produced by combining techniques from different traditions set standards for quality and sophistication that competitors struggle to match long after the workshops themselves have disappeared. Yet perhaps their greatest legacy lies not in any specific innovation, but in their fundamental approach to relationships. Where most classical civilizations sought to impose their values on others through conquest and forced conversion, these maritime traders prospered by adapting to local conditions while maintaining their essential identity. This flexibility, this willingness to change without surrendering core principles, becomes a model for survival in an interconnected world. The archaeological record reveals the extent of this influence, as excavations throughout the Mediterranean uncover evidence of their presence in the most unexpected locations. Inscriptions in their script appear on monuments in Spain and Sardinia, while pottery fragments bearing their distinctive decorative motifs surface in Greek cities and Roman settlements. Most remarkably, genetic studies suggest that these populations left biological as well as cultural legacies throughout their former territories. Modern populations in Lebanon, Tunisia, Spain, and Sicily show genetic markers that trace back to migrations, demonstrating that the movement of peoples accompanied the spread of ideas and techniques. The rediscovery of this civilization begins during the Renaissance as European scholars, seeking to understand the origins of their own alphabetic writing, trace the development of letters back to their Semitic sources. The realization that European literacy depends on innovations developed by a Near Eastern people challenges assumptions about the sources of Western civilization. Archaeological exploration accelerates during the 19th and 20th centuries, as excavations at Byblos, Tyre, and Carthage reveal the sophistication of their urban civilization. The discovery of intact ships, harbour installations, and workshop complexes demonstrates technological capabilities that rival anything achieved by contemporary civilizations. The decipherment of inscriptions provides direct access to their thoughts and experiences, for the first time since their language ceased to be spoken. These texts reveal a people far more complex than the stereotypical merchants that classical sources describe, showing poets, priests, craftsmen, and administrators who created a sophisticated literate culture. Modern Lebanon and Tunisia have embraced this heritage as symbols of national identity that transcend more recent political divisions. The cedar tree on Lebanon's flag recalls the forests that provided timber for ships, while Tunisia's archaeological sites attract visitors seeking to understand the origins of their own civilization. The contested legacy reflects continuing debates about the nature of their society and its contributions to development. The evidence for child sacrifice, preserved in the Tophets scattered throughout their former territories, challenges romantic notions about classical civilizations while raising difficult questions about the relationship between cultural achievement and moral development. Biblical traditions, which preserve both positive and negative memories of interactions with Hebrew kingdoms, contribute to complex attitudes toward their legacy. The alliance between Hiram of Tyre and Solomon of Israel represents beneficial cooperation between different peoples, while prophetic condemnations of wealth and religious practices reflect moral concerns that resonate with modern audiences. Greek and Roman sources, written by competitors and eventual conquerors, provide biased accounts that emphasize negative stereotypes while downplaying achievements. The image of the greedy merchant who values profit above honor reflects the propaganda needs of territorial powers rather than accurate historical assessment. Modern scholarship attempts to balance these conflicting traditions by examining archaeological evidence and comparative studies that place this civilization within its proper historical context. The emerging picture reveals a people whose achievements far exceed anything suggested by hostile sources, while acknowledging the moral complexities that accompany any serious examination of the past. The influence on modern, global civilization becomes clear when we consider how thoroughly their innovations have shaped the world we inhabit. Every time we write a letter, send an email, or post on social media, we use an alphabetic system that traces back to their commercial needs. Every international business transaction relies on legal and financial concepts that they pioneered. Every voyage of exploration employs navigation principles that they developed. The internet, that greatest network of connection, operates according to principles that their merchants would recognize: voluntary cooperation across cultural boundaries, mutual benefit through exchange of information and services, and adaptation to local conditions while maintaining universal standards. The global economy that connects every continent through trade relationships mirrors the commercial networks that once linked their colonies from Spain to Cyprus. The multinational corporations that dominate international commerce employ organizational methods that echo the flexibility and cultural adaptation that made their enterprises successful. Most profoundly, the modern ideal of multiculturalism, the belief that diverse populations can cooperate while preserving their distinctive identities, reflects lessons that this civilization embodied long before the concept acquired its contemporary name. Their success in creating prosperous communities that included people from many different backgrounds provides a historical model for addressing the challenges of diversity in an interconnected world. Why these maritime traders matter becomes clear when we recognize that they represent an alternative path of development, one based on connection rather than conquest, on adaptation rather than domination, on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. Their ultimate defeat by territorial empires that preferred possession to partnership demonstrates the historical advantages of military force, but their cultural victory, through the persistence of their innovations, suggests that cooperation may prove more durable than conquest. In our contemporary world, where global challenges require international cooperation, and where technological advances make isolation impossible, their approaches to relationships offer insights that purely territorial models cannot provide. Their experience suggests that prosperity depends less on controlling resources than on facilitating exchanges, less on imposing uniformity than on managing diversity, less on building walls than on creating networks. The children of the Crimson Dye sleep in graves scattered across 3 continents, their cities reduced to archaeological sites, their fleets long since rotted on the ocean floor. Yet their deepest achievements live on in the fundamental structures of civilization. Every letter we write, every commercial transaction we complete, every voyage of discovery we undertake, carries forward innovations that they pioneered in harbors overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Their story ends not with the fall of Carthage, but with the recognition that certain achievements transcend the political boundaries that contain them. Empires rise and fall, languages disappear, cities crumble into dust. Yet the best insights of the spirit pass from generation to generation, carried forward by people who may never know their sources, but who benefit from their wisdom. The last word belongs not to the Romans who destroyed them, nor to the archaeologists who rediscover them, but to every person who has ever written a letter, conducted honest business across cultural boundaries, or dreamed of distant shores. In these simple acts, these seafaring innovators achieve the immortality that eluded them in life, the immortality of ideas too valuable to die, innovations too useful to forget, and dreams too powerful to destroy. The sea remembers what the land forgets. On quiet mornings, when the Mediterranean lies still as glass, fishing boats launch from harbors where purple-sailed ships once anchored, their crews speaking languages that would sound foreign to ears, yet following courses laid down by navigators whose names have vanished from memory. The children of the Crimson Dye have come home at last, not to the cities they built or the kingdoms they ruled, but to the hearts and minds of those who continue their greatest work, connecting the family across the waters that divide us, through the innovations that unite us, and by the timeless hope that distant shores may yet become familiar harbors.